Welcome to my Diablo 4 Bone Spear Necromancer guide. So I've been really enjoying playing this character, but it's taken me several iterations of terrible and mediocre builds to get to this point to find something that actually kind of works very well. So I wanted to share this with everyone. If you just want the specific rundowns, the gear, the skill tree, the paragons, there will be chapters in the video so you can jump straight to what you're looking for. But for everyone else, let's get started with a quick demonstration of this build in action. So the way that this build works is we're trying to focus on casting as many bone spears as we can and minimizing the time that we spend casting other stuff. We have essence on kill. We've invested a lot in essence cost reduction, and occasionally we get essence from hitting things. If we start running low on essence, we can cast a bone prison around monsters, and that will give us a lot more essence. So if I just waste some of my essence over here, I can go ahead and find a group of monsters, cast a bone prison on them. That's going to give me a substantial amount of essence back. And also, we in general want to kill things from far away because we have distance damage scaling. We have these echoes on our bone spear that spawn kind of far away from us. And you can see that our essence is pretty much capped off all the time. If we play this correctly, we're pretty much casting bone spears all the time, and that's a lot of fun. That's great. Now, one thing that I wanted to let you guys know is that I know oftentimes when you're watching build guides, you're worried that this is a guy who spent a lot of time on his character, his gear must be super good. Well, that's why when I was doing this demo, I was doing it with just a random one-handed sword that I found. No upgrades, no gems, no enchantments, and no offhand. It's just a one-handed weapon. This build is a lot better with two-handed weapons. So basically, my attack power is only 3k here with this weapon, and it should be 7k. Also, my gear is all from level 72 or earlier, most of it like late 60s. So this is not like super endgame perfectly optimized gear. This build works well with reasonable gear. Okay, so how do we make this build work? Let's start with a quick discussion of an important sort of mathematical concept that underlies the way that this build scales, and this applies to a lot of RPG games in general. When you have a quantity that you're trying to optimize, that's the difference of two values that are relatively large, the way that that scales can be somewhat counterintuitive. So let's take one of the most common examples of this, which is your health sustain in combat. Let's say you have a character with 500 health, you regenerate 250 health per second, and you're taking 300 health per second damage in combat. What would happen if you lost 20% of your healing per second? If you lose 20% of your healing per second, you go from 250 down to 200. You're now taking twice as much damage. And so now, instead of lasting for 10 seconds, you're going to only last for 5 seconds in combat. So that's a factor of 2 change by only changing 20% of the healing. What if you go the other way? If you increase your healing by 10% from 250 up to 275, you're now doubling the amount of time that you can last in that combat because you're taking 25 per second instead of 50 per second. So the point is that as you get closer to those two numbers balancing each other out, the returns on your investment increase exponentially. The reason that I bring this up is because at the beginning, when you start investing into things like resource cost reduction or regeneration of essence, it's gonna feel like you're not getting any return on your investment at all. That's kind of how exponentially increasing returns works. But you're gonna eventually get a point where you get near that balance, and then all of a sudden, a small change is going to feel like suddenly the build is wonderful and it's playable and you're just casting bone spears all the time. So that's what we want to aim for. The most basic ingredients that you need to get this build off the ground are, first of all, this weapon imprint. You want this on a two-handed weapon for 2 reasons. One, we talked about essence. We're trying to minimize our essence spending. And so having a weapon that attacks more slowly, deals more damage per cast, that's just optimizing our essence efficiency. Also, two-handed weapons get way stronger imprints, and so there's no question about it. You want to be using a two-handed weapon in this build. You want to put on this bone spear imprint, which is basically the cornerstone of making bone spear a good skill. So this gives you more vulnerability, and this gives you way more damage with your bone spear. Other key ingredients on this build are, of course, the ossified essence passive. This is kind of the fundamental idea behind which everything stems, which is that we're scaling based off of essence. This synergizes really well with the fact that we're going to be trying to keep our essence high all the time. It all synergizes very well. So we do more damage, the more essence we have. We'll keep that in mind throughout the build. This also gives us more damage for more essence. This stuff is all crit related, so we're scaling crit, we're scaling essence. Early on, when you don't have a lot of max essence and a lot of sources of essence recovery, this Iron Maiden with Enhanced Iron Maiden is a really valuable way to also regenerate your essence. It gives you a 0 cooldown, 0 cost spell that will generate 5 essence for each enemy that you hit. You can only do it 1 time per enemy, but whenever you encounter a new pack of monsters, you can throw this on, get a lot more essence back. You combine that with Bone Prison that gives you essence for each enemy that you trap in, and those are really good sources of essence generation if your essence starts running low. Now, the final key ingredient to put all this together is the Paragon board with Bone Graft on it. You kind of want to rush straight to this Paragon board as quickly as you can, and the first thing you want to grab is Reinvigorate. This, plus all the surrounding Essence and Essence on Kill nodes, is really going to make this build work. Get all the Essence on Kill and Essence nodes around here, then rush for Bone Graft after that. That gives you max Essence when you hit enemies with Bone skills, as well as damage. And when you have these two things, your build will pretty much be ready to go. There are a couple more things that you can do with your items to help with essence regeneration. This one here gives you essence regeneration when you crit with a bone skill. So this, if you're casting a lot of bone skills, should basically be all the time. This just gives you more essence regeneration. The later game version that I have that I think is a bit better is this one, where you get a lucky hit chance to regenerate essence when you hit things with bone skills. But this power is a bit rare to find. It took me a long time to find it, so you definitely don't need it. I played for a long time with this, and it works totally fine. Okay, so let's take a look at that sort of base version of the build in action here real quick. I'm gonna swap builds over to that. Taking off the unique hat, because I don't know if you'll necessarily find that quickly, I've swapped this over to this passive, which you can get a lower numbered version from a dungeon, and let's take off a pair of boots as well while we're at it, because boots and amulet both give essence cost reduction, and since these are ancestral and upgraded items, the numbers are kind of high. So one amulet might be the same as like 2 of the lower pieces of gear. My character's going to be kind of slow because I took off my boots, but we're testing how the build works. So for white monsters, I'm just going to cast Bone Spears on them. I might occasionally blow up a corpse. When there's a pack here, I will put a Bone Prison on them to make them vulnerable. And I will cast my Iron Maiden. That helps get me back my essence. And you can see that I'm killing things pretty quickly. My character's moving slowly because I'm not wearing any boots. But as you can see, the build is working quite well. Things are dying very efficiently. And remember that I'm wearing a one-handed weapon, no hat, no boots, and a random ring that doesn't really have helpful affixes on it. One other thing that you can do with this base version of the build if you're having trouble with essence regeneration is on your Book of the Dead to take the ice skeletal mages that generate essence on attack. If you also find some piece of gear that you can put +2 skeletal mages imprint on, you'll find that that really generates you a lot of essence. The only downside there is that you have to worry about summoning mages, but if you have the skeleton sacrifice, you only have mages, you'll find they survive pretty well. Okay, now let's talk about the fully fledged version of the build that I am running. We'll go through gear, skill tree, paragon tree, Book of the Dead, everything that you need to make the build work. Okay, I'm gonna start bottom up because it kind of makes a little more sense if you go that way on the tree. Ossified Essence. This is the cornerstone of the build. More damage for more essence. We're gonna keep that in mind throughout everything that we do. Ultimate skills. Actually, for the Necromancer, none of these ultimate skills are really that good. Bone Storm is a bone skill, but it does stuff close by, and we want to be hitting stuff far away because we want to scale distant damage on our weapons and our gear, and because the echoes that are created by the Bone Spear... I don't have the hat on. The echoes that are created by the Bone Spear spawn far away. See, the first one is here, the second one is here, so the Bone Storm is only going to be like here. It's not going to be very helpful. It also has very low uptime because long cooldown and low duration. So I played around with using it, and I honestly just didn't find it very helpful. So we're not going to get any ultimate skills, but we are going to get these 2 passives here. They're very helpful, DR and increased sacrifice bonus for our summons. Up here, we've got a cluster of wonderful passives for our bone skills. We're going to go ahead and max out all of these. This one is the only questionable one. If you don't want to put points in this or you don't want to max it out, if you have somewhere better to put points, feel free. This just helps to reduce the cooldown of our Bone Prison, which is really nice because Bone Prison makes things vulnerable, and Bone Prison gives us essence back in case we need it. Now we grab a 1-pointer Corpse Tendrils, and we'll take the vulnerable upgrade for that. Another way to make things vulnerable, the CC on this is really amazing. It helps stack things together as the Bone Spear goes through them, so that really helps with our damage and with elite packs. Here, this is for the earlier game version of the build. We have the Iron Maiden with the Enhanced Iron Maiden. For later game version of the build, you can completely take this out. You don't need it. Here, we're taking Bone Prison because it helps to lock monsters in place, stack them together, which is really helpful. It gives us essence back, and it makes enemies vulnerable, which is really helpful against bosses or single targets that otherwise it would be more difficult for us to make vulnerable. If you put more points into this, it reduces the cooldown, so that can be helpful if you don't have other good places to put your points. Now here we also get a 1-pointer corpse explode. This is just to allow us to consume corpses. There are some other places in our build that we benefit from consuming corpses. Down here we take 3 points here to regenerate essence from consuming a corpse. This used to be 3 points of essence per point invested, which was a total of 9 essence per cast, which is really good. Now it's nerfed down to 6, so I don't recommend using this as a method of generating essence other than just once in a blue moon when you also need it to get some other buffs. And then you can put points in Fueled by Death as well. This will give you more damage after you consume a corpse. With this combination, if you consume 1 corpse every 6 seconds, you have extra damage, and it gives you a little bit of essence back, so that's good. We take Blood Mist. This would be another option for if you want to take some points out of the other spots, and you could load them into Blood Mist. That'll reduce the cooldown, which will make that skill available more. It's obviously very beneficial. This skill you want to use for CC break because there's no other form of CC break in this build, and CC chains can be kind of annoying to deal with. So if you get CC'd, if your character's stuck, this is your button to get out of that. A nice thing to note about Blood Mist is that you don't actually have to wait for the skill to expire because you can't do anything while Blood Mist is active. So you can press it, just run a little bit away, and then you can press the skill again to disengage, so then you can go back to fighting. Up here in core skills, we're going to max out Bone Spear, and then we're going to take the Paranormal Bone Spear. The Supernatural Bone Spear gives us Vuln, but we're going to look for other sources of Vuln so that we can get that crit strike here, which is really helpful for our damage. And then as far as passives are concerned, this Hewed Flesh helps us to generate corpses against bosses. It's not really necessary most of the time, but it can be helpful to have against bosses, especially if you're stacking some other buffs based on consuming corpses. Definitely not necessary though if you want to experiment with a build without this. That would probably still work very well, especially if you're not bossing that much. This is probably the most important part of this build. Unliving Essence, max energy increased, definitely good. Imperfectly Balanced, the biggest possible trap for this Necromancer build. And every guide that I've seen has points in this, but it completely contradicts the point of this build. That's why we had that whole discussion before about exponentially increasing returns on this sort of resource cost reduction and essence generation. If I took this imperfectly balanced node, I would still probably be able to cast a lot of Bone Spears and I would be near max essence a lot of the time. But let's say I have to cast 1 or 2 more other spells instead of Bone Spear. Let's say my essence spends most of the time at 80 to 90% instead of 90 to 100%. I'm losing a lot of damage, first of all, just from being a little bit lower in essence because I scale so much based on the amount of essence I have when I cast stuff. And then, on top of that, 1 more cast of another spell is not a Bone Spear. That's a huge loss to DPS. So avoid this passive, especially at first. If you really think that you're maintaining your essence all the time and you want to try this out, I would say try it out 1 point at a time and see if you're really sticking to that max essence. But if you're spending your time at 80% instead of 100% essence and you're gaining 15% more damage for that, that's not worth it. You're more than losing it in other ways. Okay, and finally, generators. Generators honestly don't matter at all for this build. You're pretty much never casting them, maybe with the exception of boss fights. I just got Teeth because I'm a Bone Necro and it's Teeth. But I would say, actually looking at this, Hemorrhage might be better. It generates more essence, 8 instead of 6. Generators basically don't do any damage. So if its only purpose is to generate essence, you can go ahead and get Hemorrhage. You can get Decompose with Slow if you want to slow a single target. I would say probably don't get Reap because it only generates 4 essence and the only purpose for its existence is going to be to generate essence. So don't get that one. Any of these are fine. But yeah, it doesn't matter that much. You'll probably pretty much never be casting it. The whole point is that we're casting Bone Spears all the time. Now let's talk about the Paragon board. The first thing that you want to do when you're early on in your character's progression is just snake through the damage. You want to make this character as much of a glass cannon as possible at the beginning because that's kind of how the scaling works. And then later on, if you're running hard Nightmare Dungeons, you kind of fill in the tankiness nodes. But let's start by going damage here, and then I grabbed Essence Glyph here, which gives you crits if you have enough dex in range. You can easily get that, so that's beneficial. And then at the beginning, I would just go straight through the damage on the left, ignore all this tankiness stuff on the right, you don't need it, and come up here, path straight to Essence over here, and path to your legendary Bone Graph. Then from there, you grab more crits, skip all this stuff at first. This I only recently got, that's later, that's tankiness stuff. And then up here, so I grabbed Exploit, which gives you vulnerable damage, and you're able to fill out the dex requirement there. Then there's nice crits up here. At this point, when you have these first two Paragon boards, you're pretty much set. So the next Paragon board that I grabbed is this Paragon board with Scent of Death. This node is kind of nice because with corpse nearby, you gain a buff. With no corpus, you gain a buff. It's kind of backwards from how you'd want it, but I mean, these are good numbers. What's also nice is that you have more crits and more crits. So this is good overall. I would path straight this way at first and ignore this tankiness stuff here, come back for that much later. So then once you've filled out the sort of DPS path of these first three Paragon boards, then you can start to think about what you want to do. Do you want to add another Paragon board? Do you want to fill out these tank affixes? These are pretty good, you know, getting percent life here, you're getting percent life here, that's very good. And here, armor, or you can go for another Paragon board. Now, for the fourth Paragon board, I went for this one, Flesh Eater, because it's kind of the only thing that has a legendary node that does anything for us at all. The rest is minion related. And then we have some crits here, and we have damage to elites here. Damage to elites is great because that's basically damage. The only thing that you care about how much damage you do in the end game is elites, because all the white monsters are going to die quickly anyway. So this board is not bad. It's decent all around, but there might be better options. As far as Book of the Dead is concerned, we're obviously sacrificing everything. And the Skeletal Warriors sacrifice is pretty straightforward. Crit chance here. For mages, we're sacrificing the Shadow because this gives us max essence. And that's perfect for our build. And then for the golems, we're sacrificing the Iron Golem for critical strike damage, which is perfect for the build. Finally, let's go through all the gear. Probably put back on my proper weapon, and we'll start with taking a look at that. So this Bone Spear imprint is super important. You need this for the build to work. And then on top of that, you're just looking for a two-hand weapon with lots of damage and crits, vulns, and distant is good. Also anything else that would affect your Bone Spear damage, like physical damage or something like that. There is a question of, do you want to use a sword or a scythe? So scythe implicit is life on kill. First I thought this was really bad. Then I got this one with a pretty high roll, started playing with it, and I realized that I don't have to drink health potions anymore. It's really nice, especially when you're clearing a lot of monsters, you're clearing through easy content. It kind of just makes the game turn into easy mode because you don't even have to think about your health. You're constantly regenerating it all. But I think if I had the choice right now, this is just a level 66 weapon, and I haven't been picking up gear since level 70, so I haven't found an upgrade. But if I had a choice, I think the right thing to do would probably be to swap this out for a sword. It's going to do a lot more damage, and I could just drink health potions instead and not be lazy. But this is basically what you're looking for. The next and most important things are your boots and your amulet. They're similar because they have similar affixes. What you want is basically just 2-prop item, essence cost reduction as high as you can get, and then some move speed to go along with it. And that's what both my boots and my amulet are. So I've got a really high essence cost reduction roll here. Remember, essence cost reduction is kind of an increasing returns thing. So getting that number as high as possible is really valuable. These pieces of gear, boots, weapon, and amulet should be the first ones that you upgrade all the way. As far as imprints on the boot, I have move speed after crit. That helps give you some mobility. There's nothing else super amazing, but feel free to play with whatever. This is kind of just a utility for me. Amulet here, again, it's kind of a 2-prop amulet. As high of an essence cost reduction roll as I could find, and it also had move speed on it, so that's great. For the imprint, I went for this ossified essence passive. This is really good because it just synergizes again with us wanting to have as much essence as we can and doing more damage when we have more essence. This passive, I will say, is a little bit rare. This imprint's a little bit rare to find. If it takes you a while and you haven't found it yet, then there are other things that you can use on your jewelry, and feel free to play with that. Other ones that you can play with are restoring essence when you crowd control an enemy, increased essence regeneration when you crit with bone skills, and maybe this one where you gain primary resource when you heal, but I'm not sure how well that works. Anyway, feel free to play with other things if you don't yet have this ossified essence passive imprint. This is just more damage, but it doesn't make the build function. While we're talking about jewelry, let's go on to rings. Rings should be your glass cannon pieces. It should be all DPS affixes, no tank, because it's really important with this build that we do as much damage as we can so that we're as efficient as we can be with our essence. We're killing things with the minimum amount of essence we can so that we're regenerating more essence. And what we want on our rings is one imprint is going to be this increased damage based on primary resource available. So again, the same idea of the more essence we have, the more damage we're going to be doing. And then the other one, on lucky hit, we regenerate some of our essence. If you don't have this, it's perfectly fine to use something else, like the Umbral imprint here, restoring essence when you crowd control. As far as affixes that we're looking for on the ring, this one right here I think is ideal. You want crit, vuln, and max essence. You can also have something like this with physical damage. or anything else that buffs your Bone Spear damage. Basically, 4 damage affixes. You're looking for crits and essence, so those are really nice to have. Now let's talk about the hat. So there's a really nice unique hat for the build, Deathless Visage. This is what creates our echoes, and these things are wonderful. They're a lot of fun. They do a lot of damage, but I'm not sure how rare this hat is. I've only found one of these all the way until level 75, and then I found like 3 of them in an hour. So I'm not entirely sure. You don't need this for the build to function. It just makes the build a lot of fun. These stats are really nice, but if you don't have this, you're looking for a hat with max essence. Now let's talk about chest and pants. These are your 2 tank pieces in this build. So go for damage reduction, life, whatever you can find that makes you more tanky here, because these pieces aren't particularly helpful for giving you a lot of damage. For imprint, what I have here is a combination between the chest and the gloves, where Blight's Defiled Area pulls enemies in, and Bone Prison spawns Blight when you cast it. If you have this ring or this imprint on any piece of gear on top of that, this counts as a crowd control, right? Because you're pulling enemies in, so this will give you more essence restored whenever you Bone Prison enemies. Pants, tank affixes as well. This tends to be kind of like a defensive utility affix. You can either have the barrier when you damage an elite, or you can have the bubble when you take damage while injured. And either way, I think those are very good ones to get. I don't know if there's anything like else super amazing to get, but feel free to kind of get whatever you want here. This is just a general defensive utility or whatever you find that's useful. For the gloves, we already talked about the imprint, but for the actual attributes, you want pure glass cannon here. So you're looking for +2 ranks of Bone Spear, and then you're looking for crit. This is gonna be a 3-prop pair of gloves here. I have the lucky hit chance, which kind of in a way synergizes with the fact that on lucky hit, I generate essence, but the number is so low, 8%. Remember, this is added to a number that has a base of 100%. So the effectiveness of this is relatively low. So pretty much this is a 3-pop pair of gloves, Bone Spear, and crit. And that wraps up the gear. So now let's finish by talking about some notes about how to play the character. The first thing to note, like we've talked about before, is that you want to keep yourself at max essence or as high of essence as possible, as much of the time as possible. So what can happen with this build is that you can get yourself into a sort of vicious cycle where you run out of energy a little bit, you run out of essence a little bit, and then you start needing to cast more Bone Spears to kill things. But once your essence drops down to 50% or lower, your damage drops dramatically, and you very quickly get into the spiral where you're casting more Bone Spears, you're draining more of your essence, you're not recovering more because you're not getting that essence on kill as much, and just because you're not spending as much time kind of passively running through the battle, but you're just spamming your Bone Spear out very quickly. And so you get in a lot of trouble very quickly. So my recommendation is, as soon as your essence drops below like 70% or 75%, get your essence capped up. Keep your essence capped up as much as possible, because that means you're going to be doing more damage with each cast, you're going to be killing things faster, and then you're going to be recovering your essence faster, and your character's just going to play a lot more smoothly. Point number 2 is that your echoes spawn pretty far away from yourself. So you want to kill things that are relatively far away. Also, your Bone Spear turns around after a certain amount of distance. And so again, if things are farther away, that will turn around right on top of them. That has a chance to hit them with multiple projectiles, and it's just going to deal more damage to them more quickly. Another thing that you can do if a monster is against a wall is you can get your Bone Prison to sort of ricochet off more quickly. And again, those multiple teeth can hit one monster. Point number 3, the biggest trouble that you're going to have with a monster fighting this build are the bubble monsters, suppressors. So what you want to do when you fight those monsters is you want to put them in a Bone Prison, so that'll hold them in place. And then you want to stand pretty much exactly this far away, however far you can be, so that you're inside the bubble, but you're as far away as you can be. And that's going to line you up so that the echo is right on top of them. That gives you that echo damage. That also keeps you far away, so that gives you distant damage, which you're scaling distant damage on your tree and probably on your weapon, depending on what weapon you have. Also, if you can get them near a wall, that's really helpful. But the most important thing is that you Bone Prison them, you set yourself up in the right spot so that you can echo them and so that you're inside the bubble, and you want to take them down as quickly as possible. All right, so now for those people who just want to see the skill tree, the Paragon tree, and the items very quickly, I'm going to breeze through all of that very quickly. We'll start with the items. So I have Deathless Visage here. Chest armor has Blight Pull, and it's a tank affix. Gloves have Bone Spear and crits. This is a damage piece with Bone Prison spawns a pool of Blight. Pants are tank and whatever utility you want to imprint, doesn't really matter. Boots and Amulet are kind of the same. You're looking for max essence cost reduction, some move speed along with that. Basically 2 props is fine. Whatever else you can find is good. The imprint for the Amulet is going to be Ossified Essence, key passive. Imprint for the boots is whatever you want, but I do crits, grant movement speed. Your weapon, you want a two-handed weapon, you want damage, you want vuln damage, you want crits, and you can choose between a scythe or a sword. I think a sword is better. I just have a scythe because that's what I found at level 66, and it's done perfectly well for me all the way to level 90. Rings are your pure DPS pieces. You want vuln damage, you want double crits. Ideally, I think you probably want essence, but something like this is good. Basically, you're looking for lots of damage, and then you're going to imprint. Skills deal more damage based on primary resource, and lucky hit generates essence. For your skill tree, get whatever you want for a generator. You're never going to cast it. Max out Bone Spear, do paranormal Bone Spear. Up here, Unliving Energy, don't get this. That's very important unless you really think that you can sustain, but even with my gear, I'm not, so don't get this. You're gonna come down here, Bone Prison, makes things vuln, gives you essence. That's great. 1 point Corpse Explode, 1 point Blood Mist is fine. You can put more there if you want. Max these out if you want, and you don't really have to. Don't put points there, that's just random. Some passives, because you don't really have other places to put them and they're kind of okay. This is a 1-pointer Corpse Tendrils. I have gear that gives it 4, but Corpse Tendrils, that's great CC, also makes things vulnerable. Max out these bone passives. This one you don't have to max out, but the other 3 are very good. We don't get an ultimate. We take these passives because they're great, and we get Ossified Essence. Then on the Paragon board, we're going through the damage, straight to Bone Graft, getting Reinvigorate, getting all the essence on kill around it. That's super important. You can come back for this tank stuff later. And here I have essence, so that's giving me more crits. Fill out all these damage stuff. This I come back for later. And then here I have an exploit, and that gives me damage against vuln. This is more damage, obviously you take that. And the tank, again, you come back for later. You don't have to get it. If you start dying, then you can come back to get it. Third board that I get is Scent of Death. I pretty much go down here to damage, go down here to damage. This stuff I got much later, so you can ignore that. Fourth board I got was Flesh Eater. I'm not sure if this is the best board, but it's not bad. You get Flesh Eater, you get damage, and you can find something to put here. Sacrificial I put here, seems kind of okay. Not sure if it's the best, but damage against elites, that's really good. All you care about is damage against elites in the end game because white monsters die right away. Finally, Book of the Dead. So you sacrifice everything. You sacrifice Skeletal Warriors for crits. You sacrifice Skeletal Mages for max essence. You sacrifice an Iron Golem for crits. And there you have it. So that's the build. You can clear through dungeons super quickly. It's a lot of fun. You get to cast Bone Spears as much as your heart desires. You get these beautiful echoes. And remember that the goal here is to spend as much time as possible casting Bone Spears, as little time as possible casting other stuff. Keep our essence capped off all the time, so we're maximizing our resource efficiency. And that's all working together to make our Bone Spears deal as much damage as possible. Hope you enjoy this build, have fun with it, and it works for you, and let me know if you have any questions.